I'm going to explain what Jupiter in Aquarius signifies, and I'll illustrate it with about a dozen names of famous people who have Jupiter in Aquarius, and we'll take a closer look at two of those charts so that we can get some actual detail. But before we do that, I feel that it's very important to understand what Jupiter and Aquarius signify on their own. So let's start with that. Jupiter is the planet of positivity. Because of that, it signifies increase. Positivity means plussing, so it's addition, increase, growth, or success in the sense of profit. Because Jupiter is the planet for growth, then it's the planet of creating things. And hence, it's the planet which signifies the creators of things. So, for example, the parents who create the children. Jupiter signifies the actual biological parents and the role that they play in a child's life. So it signifies all parental figures in society, like priests, teachers, gurus, guides, coaches, you name it. Also, because Jupiter is got a lot of creativity and a lot of surplus, it's therefore a generous, giving planet. Another aspect of positivity is the sense of optimism. Jupiter is a planet signifying our optimism, and that is why Jupiter has to do with the things we trust, or we believe in, or we have faith in. And that, in turn, is why Jupiter has to do with morals and values and ethics. And that, in turn, is why Jupiter has to do with religion and philosophies and lifestyles. So that's what you need to know about Jupiter. Now, as for Aquarius, Aquarius essentially is a sign of anti-hierarchy. So it has to do with the decentralization of power or focus or attention. That's why Aquarius is very well suited towards the masses and the people and the commoner. If we are decentralizing power from the king, that means that we're taking away the big boss, we're taking away the centralized decision maker, the one who's the focus of everything. So this is why the flavor of Aquarius is anti-ego. It's anti-king, which means anti-ego. So Aquarius is a place which favors humility or practicality and usefulness and service in a practical way to a lot of people. Aquarius is also therefore quite appealing and attractive to the common people, really. Because it values common people equally with royal people, so common people like that. So Aquarius has an attractiveness to it, which is often described as grassroots appeal. And because Aquarius has this humble nature to it, it likes to get straight to the point. It likes to get to the job, get the job done. It doesn't like to mess around with frills, decorations, advertisements beforehand, etc. So it's like a simple sign, which is no frilly. One other important thing about Aquarius is if it's anti-hierarchy, it means it's decentralizing power. We already explained how that works in terms of actual power or in terms of personal power and ego. Now, consider how it works in terms of how you think. Aquarius decentralizes the thinking process, or in other words, it decentralizes the information source. And this is why Aquarius is characterized as being very diverse and eclectic and curious. It's very interested in a lot of different opinions, a lot of different point of views, and it's collecting those from various places rather than taking everything from one source. Now we know what we need to know about Jupiter and Aquarius to be able to think and talk and visualize what we should interpret if we have a chart with Jupiter in Aquarius. Let's do that right now. The main issue that will resonate when Jupiter goes into Aquarius is that Jupiter has to do with parenting. And Aquarius is very anti-hierarchical. Parenting is hierarchical. So there's a clash between Jupiter, which favors hierarchy, and Aquarius, which disfavors hierarchy. So when you have Jupiter in Aquarius, the interpretation is, here's a person who's iconoclastic. They will not be normal. They tend to break a mold just because it's a mold. They tend to want to be outside of the norm. They tend to want to go outside of the envelope, push an envelope, go outside of a box. Hence, the people are often difficult to teach or educate, or they have a hard time with the teachers or the educational system, because they're not into this hierarchical structure of getting all your information from somebody who's categorically superior to you and from one source. Also, Jupiter and Aquarius on the same theme, it's therefore anti-normative or anti-authority. So you could describe it as rebellious, and therefore the classics, which are written in very conservative cultures, they tend to dislike Jupiter and Aquarius. Another thing which goes on here with Jupiter and Aquarius is that there's a clash between parenting and humility. Because parenting requires authority. You have to exert your authority and control over the child. But humility is diversifying the power and giving the power to the subordinate. So this is another clash, and one of the interesting ways that this plays out, of course, it plays out in terms of having a unique style of leadership which would only work in a democratic way, or in a way which is like giving power to the people. But another interesting thing about this is it therefore produces a hesitancy to take a lead role. And because Jupiter has to do with the sound of our voice, it also tends to give speech impediments. All right, another thing about Jupiter and Aquarius, which also has to do with parenting, is that parenting goes pretty well with appeal. So let me explain why. Parenting means you're the leader, and the kids will listen to you and follow you. Appeal means people follow you, people listen to you, people like you. So it's very complicated to have Jupiter and Aquarius, or to understand Jupiter and Aquarius, because on one hand, parenting is counter to the anti-hierarchy of Aquarius. However, on the other hand, parenting is very good with the grassroots appeal of Aquarius. So Jupiter in Aquarius does give leadership ability for sure, because the common people like you. They will vote for you. They will want you to represent them because they feel you understand them, because you're relatable. But at the same time, this person who is the leader will lead in a way which is not very hierarchical or monarchical, etc. When we put some names on this, it might become more clear or concrete. The third thing I want to just mention before we move on to that is Jupiter being the planet of increase also resonates with something in Aquarius. It resonates with the fact that Aquarius is collecting. It's collective. It's eclectic. So Jupiter likes to increase and Aquarius likes to collect, and that goes well together. And the result is that Jupiter in Aquarius produces an appetite for acquiring resources and wealth. Now let's put some faces on Jupiter in Aquarius. Here are some important politicians: Barack Obama, Dwight Eisenhower, Joseph Stalin, and Fidel Castro. Really interesting. Barack Obama is a perfect example of the parenting and hierarchy clash working at the same time as the parenting and appeal synergy. So he gets elected to be president, but he's extremely iconoclastic because he's breaking hundreds of years of traditions, being the first African-American president. Joseph Stalin, again, military and communist. trying to give power to the people against the former like Russian monarchy type place. Fidel Castro, another revolutionary trying to give power to the people. The next group of people to look at are philosophers, which is very interesting because Jupiter always has something to do with philosophy. Let's see what kind of philosophy we get when Jupiter is in Aquarius. Michelangelo, Helena Blavatsky, who is the founder of some type of a Theosophical Society or something like that, and Sai Baba, again another guru figure who's mostly into mystical things like doing magic, impressing people by magic. Immanuel Kant, a very important Christian philosopher. Alan Watson, Allen Ginsberg, very eclectic philosophers from the 1960s, I do believe. Then we also have a group of outstanding writers. Anthony Hopkins, he's not only an actor but a writer. Agatha Christie, H.P. Lovecraft, Walt Whitman, and John Steinbeck. Most of these people have a very similar flavor to the type of art that they're producing, which is pretty Saturnian. Also, Anthony Hopkins is an interesting example of the stutter. And then there's a couple of other random names which are very interesting. Marilyn Monroe, Jupiter in Aquarius. It's the grassroots appeal. The thing about Marilyn Monroe, which is interesting because I have a few degrees of separation from her personally, she's very, very humble and nice to the common person. Hugh Hefner. Again, you get that appeal, and then you get this iconoclasticness of pushing a boundary, doing something that's not really accepted, going beyond a norm. And you can even say taking the nude female out of a private place and into a public place is like decentralizing in a certain way. Pablo Escobar, the famous drug lord. So again, like iconoclast, anti-normative, anti-authority, yet a leader. And also a huge appetite for money. Hugh Hefner also. Marilyn Monroe too. Moriarty, who is a lawyer who would argue for criminals. Bernard Madoff, probably what I would consider perhaps the poster child for at least the classical view of Jupiter in Aquarius. In case you're not aware, Bernard Madoff operated the hugest financial scam in the history of the world, or at least in the history of America, while being in the position of like extreme authority in the financial world. So let's look at Bernard Madoff's chart and Barack Obama's chart and see what the difference between the two is. So Bernard Madoff, again, I would consider this like the textbook Jupiter in Aquarius classical view. Sure enough, if you look at this chart, Jupiter in Aquarius is extremely dominant and is the most dominant planet in it. Why? It is exactly opposite from the ascendant, and it's the only planet that is that in that condition. So it has the hugest influence on the ascendant out of any planet in the whole chart. So yeah, as you would expect, therefore, he's a good example of Jupiter in Aquarius being very interested in money, working kind of covertly, as if being amongst the people, but at the same time being very subversive. What is it about him that particularly, more than the other people on this list, makes him into money so much? It's the fact that primarily it's the fact that his 11th and 9th houses are in mutual exchange. You see, his Mercury is in the 9th house, Aries, and his Mars is in the 11th house, Gemini. What is it about Bernie Madoff that makes him more immoral than the rest of the people? Debilitated Saturn in the 9th house. So that debilitated Saturn in the 9th house is what's magnifying or enabling the potential that Jupiter in Aquarius also has, which is to be anti-authority in the sense of anti-law, unlawful. Now for Barack Obama, he does not have Jupiter in Aquarius as the most dominant planet in the chart. That's how he's different from Bernie Madoff. He has Jupiter in Aquarius in the first house, but not as the most dominant, as is playing a supporting role. The most dominant planet in his chart is the Sun in Leo, in a Raja Yoga, in a royal yoga. And why? Again, it's the same exact principle. Again, it just has the most intense effect on the ascendant out of any planet in the chart. The Sun, his Sun in Leo, which is very royal, so it's not going to accentuate the inability to be a leader, which otherwise could be accentuated by the clash between parenting and anti-hierarchy when you have Jupiter in Aquarius. That's not supported by anything else in his chart. Or it's not supported by the main theme of his chart. The main theme of his chart is, wow, here's a king, the Sun in Leo. His Sun in Leo is with Mercury, while the Sun is the 7th Lord and Mercury is the 5th Lord, so that creates Raja Yoga, royalty. Furthermore, another principle of what will make somebody immensely powerful or kingly is if the First Lord is very strong and bright while being aspected by the 9th Lord. We heard this from Paladipika. And Barack Obama has exactly that. He has the First Lord very far from the Sun in its own sign, while being aspected by the 9th Lord. This also creates another Raja Yoga. So that's why he becomes a king or president, even though he has an anti-presidential aspect to him, which is Jupiter in Aquarius. But that's why he's an iconoclast of a president. So I hope you enjoyed that explanation of Jupiter in Aquarius. If you would like to see my interpretation for all of your planets in your signs and houses and aspects, etc., you can go to my website and order this reading, the guided tour to your birth chart. And besides that, also subscribe to this channel, like the video, give a comment if you like, and stick around. I would like to see you again when I do the next video, Jupiter in Pisces. Thank you.